All right, welcome everybody. Call the public meeting to order for Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. It's 6:02. Any public comments for items not on the agenda for discussion and not action? Yes.
Yes. George Hayden, resident taxpayer in Ireland. Having attended the previous select board meeting, or excuse me, the previous appeals board meeting, it's come to the attention of myself and some other year-round residents that we are working on a petition that will be circulated to ask for Sam McLean's removal from the appeals board for some ethical concerns that have come up in the course of our looking into this matter. And we simply wanted to let the select board know, since you are the people who appointed her, you would be the people who have the power to act upon her removal if that were allowed.
All right, thank you. All right, any other comments?
I just wanted to comment. I'm Mike McKee, the 107 Cottage Road. As we go through what's happening with us, Sunday, my wife and I went down to the beach, down the public right of way to the beach, and scrawled in the sand was, "I'm watching you." All right, so I just want you to know that this friendly town of Shabegue Island is getting a little personal. All right, we are going to continue doing what we're doing, but we have children on this island, and we have children who are home from college, and we do not take it lightly if people start leaving messages around for us. All right, so I just wanted to make that public comment. "I'm watching you" is not appropriate, especially with teenage daughters and children in the house. Thank you.
All right, any other comments? All right, moving on to town reports.
All right, hi, everybody. So a few things under the TA report. So the first one, just kind of some follow-up from the ARPA conversation that we had the last couple of meetings. There was a question raised to look into see if the funds could be used to substitute some of the like the legal fees. And I copied and pasted in here what legal had responded to, and they do not advise. They would advise against the town trying to use those funds for that particular matter because it doesn't really fall under the category of the services. And then additionally, with the discussion about how we would have to go to town vote to appropriate the money, the last 2 years, there had been an article in the town meeting, and this one I copied and pasted from last June, that allows selectmen to choose how the funds are distributed. So if for any reason between now and the next budget season or July 1st, the selectmen choose to decide to appropriate the funds to something, that vote has allowed to take place. Any questions about that?
Yeah. That's not how I'm reading what Natalie's comments say. What I'm reading is Natalie is saying there are a very limited number of prohibited uses, and then she lists 3 statements, none of which prohibit what we were talking about doing with legal funds. Then she goes on to say the use of ARPA funds to replenish a legal services fund is a little too close to prohibited uses, 1 and 2 for my comfort. But 1 and 2 say no payment of debt service or replenishment of rainy day funds. A legal services fund is neither of those. And number 2 says no satisfaction of settlements and judgments. A legal expenses fund is not that. So I read her not being comfortable with it, and she advises against it. I still plan to move that we do that.
So I reached out, it was MMA Legal, it was Natalie that had reached out to this, and the specific question that I asked was if the selectmen have run out of money in legal funds, can can money going forward be substituted, and that was their response, so,
This is their response in blue.
yes.
Right. And this was not Natalie? You said you reached out to legal earlier. so this
MMA
was
legal.
MMA, okay. I still say the same thing. I don't see anything here that says we can't do that.
Okay, moving on.
The next one is in reference to the Charles Heiser pier application that was shared with you a couple meetings ago. It had been brought to Coastal Waters' attention. We had advertised for a public hearing to take place. We had sent out the notices to all the abutters. It was also shared with the planning board and the board of selectmen. And on January 3rd, Justin Dowdy and I received an email from the project assistant letting us know that the application was going to be withdrawn. I did follow up and ask if we should see this in the future, and the response was most likely, but at this time, the property owner is not looking to do anything. So at this point, there's really no action for any of the boards to take in that matter. Any questions about that? The next one is in terms of the Cousins Island update. The separation between the dock and the pavement that had been discussed was fixed by Public Works. They had initially filled a hole, and then photos were shared with me about the filling having caved in, and so they ended up going back shortly thereafter and fixing it. So there seems like there's been positive feedback on that. And then the pothole that Mark had described on Colby Shore was fixed. And Mark had since emailed, I don't know if you want to comment to that about your employee.
Yeah, my question was the material that was used, reclaimed, ground up tar was put in.
Cold mix, what we use on the roads, that they roll down flat.
Yeah,
So
I'm
that's
not
not
done
used
talking, if you may. I'm not done talking. It's reclaimed, it's in the hole. It's not cold mix. I know the difference between cold mix and reclaim. Reclaim is ground up roads, and it has no binding adhesive material in it. So it's coming right out of the hole. I would ask that we consider using cold patch. Cold patch, we're out of cold patch, I think, currently on Shabig. It doesn't matter, you can buy cold patch from Home Depot or Ace Hardware or any hardware store like that. The cold patch is the patch of choice for any paved surface, especially hot top, if you put that tar. Cold mix can be used, but it needs to be tampered or compacted at least by hand. So I would ask that we take out that loose material and put something in the not permanent.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
I'm the one who shoveled the bucket full of stuff that went over there. It did come out of a very large pile of stuff, because we don't have any cold patch, but we would have used cold patch to put it over. They wanted it filled right away. It was the only material we had to put in there. The reclaim is frozen solid, so we couldn't use reclaim anyways. That stuff we brought in the building overnight, warmed it up, tapped it down, and stuff the best we could. But he mentioned we had come out, and like I said, I don't know, we don't have any cold patch right now. We're waiting for spring to go. Said truck 10 to get some, because we don't need 18 yards of it anymore. We just need a small part of it. So that's what we did, and Doug mentioned it come out, and right now, that's all we have material that we could put in the hole, that would add to any kind of binding whatsoever, that, push it down.
If I may, you don't need to buy a $2,000 or $3,000 load of cold mix to fill up your small hole. That's my point. You can buy small amounts from home improvement stores. If you don't have any cold press, that's fine. It doesn't mean we have to wait to get cold press. Or these bottles. You can buy that hard. Right.
And the last thing under the Cousins Island update is that on here I had that Public Works is working to fix the piling. And since I had written that up, there's been email communications with the selectmen chair in this. There was one day, Jen, Bo, and I and Chuck sat down, and Chuck explained the reasons why they are unable to get up to the area where the filings need to be fixed. And so through the conversation, it was determined that they would seek assistance. They have $5,000 in the public works budget for contracted services. The same day, had reached out to a company. Within a couple of days, company came out and looked at the work and said that they would be able to come out the week after next, which is going to be next week, and fix that for a price of around $600. So that is the plan to get that done.
I'll just comment on that. I do apologize. If I would remember that they had that in their budget, I wouldn't have brought it up during that meeting on Saturday. But I did have to have that meeting on Saturday because of the MEMA thing. And I think it was a good thing that we had that, because it public voiced a few areas that we needed. So, but I do apologize. Time on that topic.
The last thing under the TA report is the storm damage update. So after the emergency meeting that was held on December 31st, Bo and I went down to South Shore Drive because there had been some property owners here, and we had walked the area. The same day, I happened to be walking East Shore Drive, and I photographed damage down there as well. And so on January 2nd, Bo and Jen and I sat down and we worked and submitted the application. The application as it was submitted is in the packet. Within a couple of days, actually, I believe it was the day after, I received a call asking us to provide a professional opinion from somebody who is in the field to determine how close or how far away we are to the estimate. Because the number was so drastic under section C with the roads and bridges, we put $1.5 million for the work, for the damage, because East Shore Drive and South Shore Drive had significant damage. South Shore Drive more specifically, there was large amount of washout. And so I had talked to Bo about this and had a list of a couple of different people that I was going to be calling because the hope was that they wanted this information within 48 hours. So by the end of the week, they wanted this information from a professional, an email or an letterhead, letting them know whether what we put in would back up or not. I happened to have received an email from Barney Baker, so I had asked him if that was a possibility. He was very responsive and came back with a very quick turnaround and provided that information. And we had that information, I believe it was either Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, and I was able to forward it right to FEMA within the time frame that they requested. And I didn't hear back about any additional follow-up about needing more information. But since then, it has transpired that FEMA is going to be coming out here. There's going to be a total of 4 or 5 of them coming out to do a visit on Friday. They'll be here on the 8 o'clock boat. And there's going to be an individual from the Cumberland County Emergency Agency and FEMA individuals, and they're going to assess those areas that we put in this application so they can visually see them, so they can take the documentation that they need them. So if there's a selectman or two that is interested in being there for that, I would be happy to accept that assistance. However, I won't have room in the town vehicle because we'll be maxed out at how many people we can fit. So, any questions about that?
Carol?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused because I had asked that we keep the select board in the loop about the communication, and did you opt not to do that? This is a really big chunk of change, I mean, $1 million, and you saw the email I sent back to Margaret, and then the logistics, where I asked that, you know, the responses be copied to the emergency management director and the board of selectmen.
I did my best. I mean, I think there was only 1 or 2 communications from yours, and from my understanding, I replied to all, but with some of these communications, like when I got an email about the fact that they were coming on the 8 o'clock code, I had seen it on my phone, so I replied to determine what day it was, because I didn't want it to be this morning and not be there, so I may have not hit the reply all on my phone. It was just my priority was to set the dates up and then make sure that the information was presented to you at the selectmen's meeting,
Well,
so.
I would ask going forward, like I did in the email, that you keep this in mind from all the communications, because this is a pretty big cost. And it's ultimately our responsibility to do. And also the emergency management director, which is Ralph, should also notify, since he's the contact with main emergency management. And would probably want to be present when they come, as he has been in the past. So I just think it's important we follow kind of a proper protocol. And I think I personally, and I don't want to necessarily speak for the rest of the selectmen, but I really want to know what's happening on this. And, because I think that in my conversation with Cumberland County Emergency Management, what she explained to me was there, there was a contingency in Barney's estimate, which can't be accommodated. And there's the difference between repairs and then ultimately mitigation. And we may qualify for mitigation funds, but that's a separate pot of money. And it's going to be important that we understand the process for that, because I think that would be a much larger sum of money. And we may have to jump through some more hoops. Shabig was apparently one of the bigger claims in terms of per capita, size of the town. So we should be prepared to answer their questions too when they come, on Friday. So I just urge you to be thoughtful and try to keep the board up to speed.
So from my experience and what I've been taught, me sitting here at a public meeting is me keeping you in the loop. So for me, CCing every selectman on every communication is very new within the last month or 2. I have not experienced that, and I'm trying my best, but this is a new type of a communication for me, because what I'm used to is sitting in a meeting and communicating that information with you that way. So,
And I guess I would treat this one differently because the magnitude of the
well,
cost.
that's the unfortunate part, is I'm not sure. Lately, I don't know should be communicated with everyone and whatnot, so I'm doing the best that I can, but it's hard to know what I have to communicate with all the selectmen. And like I said, I wasn't even aware up until a couple days ago that they were coming, because I wasn't part of that communication. I don't know how that transpired, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't do something that I shouldn't have and follow it up to make sure that I was a presence when they were there, and I, coordinated, because I think that that's my responsibility in this position to do. So I didn't need to avoid or not involve somebody in the communications plan meetings.
And I just want to clarify specifically on the FEMA stuff. I think it's important we all know what's going on. Is that the rest of the board feel that way?
Yeah, and I have a further question on item C on the assessment. I assume there's some level of detail, like address or range of road or whatever. But partial 1 is $170,000, and partial 2 is $150,000 or whatever. What's the detail behind 1,000,005?
So in the meeting from Saturday, there was the talk of the work for South Shore Drive being in the upwards of $500,000 or more. And then when we went and we talked with the property owners and walked, through the looks of things, it appeared that it could be even more significant, and then when there were visible, damage to East Shore Drive, there was, more added. So through the conversation of Jen and I, with other damages, and then those two roads, South Shore Drive, be specific, we've kind of determined that number.
So we kind of figured around $1 million, I kind of figured $500,000 for South Shore was a little low. So went a little higher, we have to adjust it, this was kind of a guess, they asked us to guess on these numbers, so. And East Shore Drive, also, yes, roughly 400 for that one, so. We just weren't quite sure what kind of number or how exactly wanted. And then they contacted us the next day and asked for a proper number or closer number from Carol.
Yeah, and if I can arrange my schedule, I'll try to join you.
So the other thing about the communications is it's really hard not to do communication. Is that like today, Jen texted about or emailed us about her being sick. Would have wish her well, but two selectmen responded to it. Or her and somebody else responded to that. So that kind of, so I just didn't want to push our limits as far as the communication. So when we get FEMA stuff, it's really hard. We need to either contact Vika if we have some type of, unless it's immediately, like you need to know this now. If you need to convey something for FEMA, contact her or send her an email personally. That
All
way.
I'm asking is that she forward us the communications with FEMA.
No, I'm just putting it out to the board. I have no problem with that, but I'm just talking about us all communicating on one
So
email.
I guess so I understand with Jen's email, are you saying that's a bad idea and we shouldn't respond? I don't quite understand what you're saying.
No, but once you get to 3, it's a meeting. So I don't think anybody would have said anything about that. I'm just saying there's a few emails that's been going around that's been responded to. And I don't respond to it because of that. Yes, Mark.
Not sure responding to the email from a select person that says
I
that
just
you're
use that.
feeling ill and saying, sorry to hear that, I hope you feel better. Not really mean.
I'm just using that as an example.
I'm not sure there's any threat.
All right, moving on. Any other comments on this?
So that's the stuff under the town administrator's report. The treasurer's report is the next thing. We are reconciled through December 30th, 2020. The balance of the check-in account is a little over $1,400,000, and there's a similar number in the reserve. Excise tax was a big number in December. Solid waste revenue has decreased for expected reasons, with the numbers down and less people here. In terms of the expense revenue, we are 6 months through the budget, so according to everything on here, we are for the most part in good standings, with the exception of the year-to-date, the legal fees, which will be discussed in a later agenda item. The solid waste barging is a little bit high, but with the way that the whole entire budget works, with that budget as a whole, we can't exceed 10%. So I'm not as concerned about that as I am with the legal fees. Any questions about the treasurer's report?
I did have a specific question about that barging and solid waste. So Have we asked Plant to come every week? Is
We
that
did
why-
during the summertime. We were asking them to come every week because that's how quickly we were filling up.
And have we backed off on that
Yes.
request now?
Yes, and I did reach out to Lionel with the anticipation of the budget to see if there would be an increase, and he said that they don't anticipate an increase, and with the fuel prices gone down, that some of the costs have gone a little bit lower, so that was good news.
Thank you.
And how does that compare to the previous year? How many barge trips? Did we go every other week, or how frequently did we barge?
Last summer, when Justin was here, he ended up having to experience a similar thing in the dead of the summer when it was really busy around the 4th of July, and through that month, he was asking them to come.
So how did the barge trips compare from 2022 to, well, fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23 so far? Are
The
they,
BART trip specifically, I haven't done that calculation. I've just looked at the numbers as a
So
whole.
we'll look at that next week. We'll have the budget next week, so we can
Okay.
really look at the line item that way. Any other questions?
So the next few things are the different, department reports. So we have Chuck here to answer any questions specific to what he has on the, public works report. And then we have the code enforcement officer report. Before I open it up to the selectmen about any particular questions, the one thing that I do want to say is that Jim had put in with his Kodo CEO report, the kind of a brief statement about the stop work order. In the last 24 hours, we have received communications from the attorney representing the Gallaghers and the Drews. This afternoon, we received communications from the attorney representing the McKees, and then we had some communications that was received from our town attorney that I have forwarded to you. With how close this information has been brought to us before this meeting, I did want to share that we have received that communication, but I would like to make recommendation that we have a proper agenda item for it next week so it could be discussed. So, because I can't really speak to any of it right now, it's just too close. And I would like to get a legal opinion about what all of this means. So I just wanted to mention that before it opened up to any questions about the other reports. If you guys are okay with that, I'll make sure that information is on the next week's budget.
Any questions? All right, move on.
So any questions to Chuck or to Jim specifically about what was put in the reports?
No questions? All right, thank you. Like I say, thanks for Chuck and for Billy, I think, actually during the storm. So,
Yeah.
watching you guys flashing lights in front of my house for hours. So, thank you.
And I did ask Chuck, we're trying something new, where on the first, typically the first meeting of the month, we have the monthly reports. What I'm gonna try to do is alternate and have one or two of the department, here. So if there are any specific questions about what's in the report, that they're here to answer it. So I can't promise that we can coordinate it every time, but I figure it's something worth to try, and Chuck was willing to be here for it, so.
Thank you.
that's
Anything
all.
else? Yes.
I noticed an email about, our appeal. It was mentioned in his report that it's being handled in the courts. Can anyone in this room, take on that?
Who would be the one?
I think, I can't remember what Alex said last about that waiting to see if, Mr. Fowler was filing an appeal, of the decision of the BAA. So the town was in a holding pattern to wait and see what Mr. Fowler was going to do. And then from
Yeah,
there-
their deadline was January 3rd to file something, and the town, yes, but then there was, holiday and weekend, and so realistically, we assumed that it would be about a week or two from that deadline that the town would see something delivered to us, and it hasn't yet, so.
Okay.
Um,
I did call the main Superior Court today, no appeal was filed.
Just Paul.
I would also point out that if they have a date, that's not the date with which they need to file it, we would need to be notified on that date.
The deadline would be January 3rd that they would file, and then,
And if we're part of that filing, we would be notified right away, not subject to delays by holiday and such.
The way that we were notified with the previous ones was it was delivered in the mail. So that's how we would have found out about it, is, we would have gotten an envelope in the mail from the clerk. And we hadn't received anything.
What previous one?
The Gallagher, the Drew one, we were initially notified by, I just received the documents in the mail.
I'm remembering all the legal letters that have come via email, specifically worded as delivered via email on the day of kind of thing. But whether
Correct,
it's
but the very
Justin's
first
point
one.
overrides, there has been no filing. It's according to Justin.
So now we will go back for the selectmen to determine if they want to proceed with anything.
Karen?
So I know this sort of comes at the end of the meeting, but while Justin's here, then I would still suggest we have a meeting next week, right?
Mhm.
So I would expect that we would have that on the agenda next week. I'd recommend that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.
If you guys have any questions, please direct them to Vika, and I'll be happy to answer anything you guys have, to clarify anything that's going on. Okay?
Thank you.
I do have one
Yes.
question that's maybe a little early, but so for Public Works, for example, for the budget, what's the process that you come up with the next year's budget? Well, Chuck's here, it'd be good to understand that.
Well, I usually get with her and we discuss what the public works needs and go from there, basically. I mean, it's,
So you sit down with the department heads and come up with an estimated budget?
Correct. So I typically get something from the fire department, and then we sit down together and go over it. The one thing that I will, while we're talking about suggest is last year during this process, Jen and Jay ended up doing a tour of the Public Works facility. That was very helpful for Jen to understand. And I would highly encourage that Bob and Carol do that to get an understanding.
Happy to.
All set? All right, moving on. Thank you. Have a great day. You too. All right, you all set? Moving on to resolution 23-001, to hear an update on coastal waters committee. Who's that? No.
So you guys got my note about, the main thing is float maintenance. I think it's time that we create a plan, try and work through some of these floats, fix them up, see what's needed. So I talked to Vika, she talked to Chuck about labeling the existing floats, trying to create a plan, do a walkthrough, see what's needed. And part of the discussion was, we have money in the reserve fund, and the group actually said, we recommend a new float, and I kind of said, well, let's look at them first, which we haven't done. But if we were to need to buy all 10 floats at once, we'd be on the hook for. So we were thinking maybe buy one a year, shuffle through that, but wanted to ask about if the 27 grand I mentioned is correct, and what do we need to do to access that and move forward?
So I'm looking at the Machias Bank Reserve Fund
Yeah,
balance, and this is accurate as of now, because,
That's correct, yes.
so in the float and ramp reserve, there is $27,755.82. In my opinion, what you would need to do is to make a request from your committee, maybe in a memo or through Vika, however you want to do it, to purchase a float. You can describe the float. We all know they're about 10 by 24, or use at facility X, replace float X, and the approximate, and just have an approximate cost. And then the board would discuss it and authorize the expenditure if these three selectmen vote in favor of it.
I did speak with Custom Floats and, request, I said, what do you need for, to create a kind of an accurate estimate instead of some photos measurements. But as, some of you may not know, but each flow is a little different, so just buying one and swapping it through the system would require some modifications, so just things that we can think about before.
Yeah.
But I think a detailed estimate from them, and there are many other players in the game, but. Just for.
Yes. And I talked to Scott Dyer the other day too about filings and floats, and we already read your message, and I asked him a similar question, got a similar answer, so that's what it would take, in my opinion, to move something forward.
Do we have a rough idea how long the float lasts on average?
I mean, no, the old floats we used to have, that Mark's dad built were made out of trees and plywood, and they lasted a long time. You fix them up in the winter, but these, they can last, if maintained, they can last upwards. These are 20 years old, right? So, and that's another part of walking through. We can repair what we have, but at some point it's just not.
Yes.
But there's no real timeline.
Right.
A lot of other municipalities stop saying they're starting a similar system, just trying to keep up on it.
So another question, is there any way to have, are they similar enough that we could have one in reserve in case we have a failure?
Yeah, we can make them work, but the hardware needs to line up with the niche. So yes, that's possible.
Yeah. And then in terms of a 10-year plan for repair and replacement, I think that's a good idea. And at the end of that 10-year, we would, if they last 15 years on average, at the end of that 10 years, we'd have a 5-year hiatus until the next one would be.
Right, and then, the main ones that are critical, maybe 5 that make that, so
Yeah.
start with those, and then maybe the old ones we take from there can be used as a auxiliary float. And then maybe the old ones, if they're good enough for some use for a fisherman or something, just, or an oyster farmer, or oyster farmer.
I applaud you guys for doing the work, looking into it. Thank you.
Yeah, and then the harbor master position, so we went through the job description, we marked it all up. We can have a meeting next week or the week after to kind of present it, and then we'll hopefully have something to put.
Yeah, so a while back, I was at a coastal waters meeting where we talked about expanding the float system on Cousins Island side. And I think there was a communication to the Board of Selectmen then with that recommendation, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, if that's something we should include in sort of future capital, savings and expenses, because it seems like we need more floats over there.
Yeah,
What's your thoughts?
we did, so I agree with you, because we have 5 over here that's full, and then 1 over there. But someone checked in with Yarmouth and said it would require planning board approval. And then there was it might have been in the interlocal agreement that it wasn't, there was something.
I was just gonna add that when the Joint Standing Committee met a couple months ago, Jen and I were over, we were put on notice that they would likely support any efforts in that direction.
Yeah.
In terms of expanding the float system, better ramps, that kind of thing. I mean, clearly there are process steps you have to go through, but they were supportive of that concept.
And then are we still in the process of changing over at Cousins? Is that still moving? Is that still on the docket or?
You mean the 80-foot ramps?
That, yeah, I saw a plan, that was a year or so ago.
It kind of is, but
Because that, if that were to
we haven't
happen.
talked to- I know, we just haven't talked to Yarmouth at all
Okay, yeah.
for a while, so we finally, Jen and Bob finally sat down with them, so there was a lot, I think, for them to invest.
One other concept that has been thrown out there has been to match up improvements on that side with improvements on this side, with this side thing being the much larger project, but making sure that we don't miss an opportunity to gain any economies of scale, or wind up deciding on this side, we need to raise the height by 5 inches, but then they don't match up properly on the other side. Those kind of coordinations, but it hasn't been going into them.
Quickly, Donna Damon actually looked into some possibilities of some grant money a couple of years ago before she got off the board through either Susan Collins or Shelley Fingery's office, and I don't recall which one. I think it was Collins. And we thought that there may be an opportunity to go after $400,000 and look at earmarking it for this type of improvement that doesn't run more. And what she ended up running into was that it would be a requirement to go through the Department of Transportation grant process for that. And if so, it would have to meet ADA type requirements for ramp width, ramp pitch, blah, blah, blah. So quick, without wasting everyone's time, it ended up not being available. But there was some discussion with Yarmouth, just like Bob said before. Bob and Jen took over, visiting over with Yarmouth. And there was a sketch possibly extending the end, the southwest end of the existing Cousins Island Wharf and shooting a longer ramp down towards where the boat lands now. Which makes some sense to me, because you don't want to just stick a longer ramp where it is now.
Yeah,
You'll shoot into shallow water.
so if that were to move out, there would be potential for maybe a ramp coming off. So just more access for.
Could I ask one more question? Yes. And if we do talk about a float over to Cousins Island, I assume it might be later on. But if it isn't later on, so the existing float that the Islander, the CPC boat and others land at over there is a pretty high float because of the deck level. So it wouldn't be likely that you would put a float lower than that, right?
That would be tough.
It'd be unsafe.
Yeah, because I think when we talked about this in the last 2 years, Alex was like, I'll give you my float, and, just looking at it would have been a safety hazard.
That's
So,
what I said.
but also if we build another one of that size and scale, it's gonna be tough for our, crew to handle. Because we can't handle the float over Cousins, to maintain it, so if it were something we needed to work on, which I think makes sense.
Thank you.
So what would be the process if we really want to start developing some improvement plans for the Cousins Island side? What's the process?
My opinion, I think my opinion would be to start with the team that you're part of, the Joint Standing Committee. I think a recommendation would come out of the Joint Standing Committee from both the township big representatives and the Yarmouth representatives. The Yarmouth representatives are the town manager and get 3 council people on the ground.
So when you say a recommendation, you mean for an actual design or just that we move forward with some improvements?
Well, I think they would have to have a design.
So we would have to give them a proposed design.
I think so. All we really have now is a sketch from Custom Flow.
So I was wondering, is that something we can sort of ask Coastal Waters to come up with a more sophisticated but conceptual design? I mean, not hiring an engineering firm, but at least I saw a design back in 2019 or something when they made the last recommendation, but I think Yarmouth is favorably disposed towards it. In fact, if I understood correctly, they would love to have us stop using their float for all our drop off and pickups because, you know, we do kind of monopolize their own float. So, and I personally find it really hard to tie up a boat over there myself. I don't know how Meredith does it, because she does, but it's really hard. You gotta crawl, it's dangerous. You gotta crawl over a bunch of boats. So I think it's overdue. I'm not saying we're gonna implement it immediately, but I'd like to get the ball rolling forward on that and get a cost estimate.
Well, I don't want to speak for Jen because she's not here tonight, but I would be willing to work with Coastal Waters and Custom Floats to come up with a bit more of a sketch that we could then bounce off of Yarmouth and try to come to a point where we have an agreement. Carol triggered a memory for me that Mr. Tupper actually suggested some further revisions to that sketch that would facilitate us not offloading on the Cousins side, some finger piers. And there were no drawings to go along with that, but it just indicated they were willing. So I agree with what Carol said, Coastal Waters being involved with that, but as one of the members of the Joint Standing Committee, I would offer to work with them and take advantage of ideas that we could get from Custom Floats to take the sketch a little bit further, so we have something to look at and talk about. If that is of any interest to the board.
Is that something you would be? Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, start with sketches, and then the big thing, I think, would be permitting, you know, in this day and age, so. You know, if the committee could look into that, talking with Yarmouth to see what would be needed from us.
Could I add one more quick thing? I had also asked, when I was back on that committee, if Yarmouth had done any sort of structural assessment of the existing old wharf, about whether it's doing well, not doing well, needed some work, and would handle a small expansion of any kind. I thought he said that the Barney's crew or somebody did that, but that might be worth checking into with Yarmouth. I can do that. Thanks, Bill.
All right. Is everybody okay with Bob working with Coastal Waters on this project?
I'll check in with Jen too. See how things move on.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on. You all set? I'm good, I think.
Could I ask one more thing?
Yeah.
Are we not gonna say anything about the seasonal flow policy tonight? I do have one comment if we don't.
I just wanted to see what he had
Oh,
to
yeah,
say about
sorry.
it and then respond to it.
Did you not want to talk about the seasonal flow?
No, I mean, it wasn't much, we talked about it at length, but nothing came out of it, so, but.
I just have one comment if I may. We made the float policy quite a few years ago, and I remember Herb and I had some disagreements of the benefit of the policy. My concern was it would get in the way if we had an open winter, which we're having this winter, meaning we might want to keep the floats up, or at least one or two floats up, which we're kind of doing right now. So I'm just wondering, do we need to tweak the policy, or do we need a policy? And why do we have a policy? Is it even working? Is it getting in the way and being interpreted differently by different groups? And let's give it some thought.
Yeah, we had the same, what you mentioned, same discussion. And in it says, you know, Public Works, Selectmen, Coastal Waters is mentioned. Should Coastal Waters be mentioned, we have a meeting, you know, a month prior to December 1st, should there be dates? I mean, all these, we'll keep digging at it and see if we can make a recommendation that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of feel, I'm not a big policy person, I think it does get in the way. It either needs to take the date out and sort of say at the recommendation of coastal waters, I think it belongs in coastal waters wheelhouse. And I would leave it up to them to decide whether they want to keep the policy or not, but I think when we had this discussion a few weeks ago, my recommendation is that it, you know, it's in the hands of coastal waters to make a recommendation to the town. They're the closest to it, they're the fishermen on the committee, and, you know, I think that's true with the trap, you know, trap movements too, and the closure of the parking, and maybe they can look at both of those things, because given the change and conditions, what we have been going on with for years maybe isn't really useful in the same way anymore. So I'd put it to coastal waters to come up with a recommendation. I don't care whether we keep the policy or not, fine with me if they ditch it. Herb's not listening. And, but I think that's the right approach. And I think we maybe will find ourselves leaving some floats in.
One more thing, just one other point about the budget conversation, the money that's in reserve, the 27K or whatever it is. I think that reserve account is called floats and ramps.
Yeah.
And there is talk, once we get some survey information, about pursuing a better ramp solution down at Bennett's, which I assume if we were gonna do anything on that, would come out of that, or is there a separate?
Barge ramps.
So barge ramps is separate and floats and ramps.
Has 10,000.
Got it.
308 grand.
Never mind, forget I said that.
There was talk about using them both, though.
Just when Justin wasn't here.
Rating.
All right, any other questions for Justin?
No.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Good job. All right. Moving on, 23-002, to discuss the town legal fees budget and take any necessary action. So we're here today because of that, I don't remember the number exactly.
Fully expended.
Yeah, fully expended,
10,000. Oh,
a little over.
yeah, $10,054.
So our options are to take it out of our selectmen contingency, or we go to the town board vote.
I have another recommendation.
You have another
Yes,
recommendation?
something that's, so I went through, after I wrote this up, I went through and figured out how many hours in total between the two lawyers was for broadband and was for dredging. We do have a broadband reserve account, we do have a dredging reserve account. $2,152 out of this has gone 10.5 hours was for broadband related work. So the selectmen can make a motion to use, you know, $2,152 out of the broadband reserve account to pay legal fees. And then I would do a journal entry to appropriate that money. 650 was for dredging, which is small, but that's another way where it wouldn't solve all the problems for the current year, but it would appropriate or relieve an extra $2 grand.
I was gonna point out that there are a couple of other options, one of which you can just say that, and the other is the ARPA funds. I believe that's still an option.
I wasn't aware we could, I thought legal fees came out of legal. I wasn't aware of that.
Legal fees do come out of legal, but with the reserve accounts that we have, you know, dredging is the cost of dredging, and broadband, the way that they're described. I think that in this case, it would be an appropriate use of funds, because you're doing it for that specific project.
that rationale, weren't some of the legal fees also accumulated for Indian Island?
Very, very minor. I think maybe an hour or two at the most, I didn't bother. I looked through and Indian Island was mentioned once or twice, but it wasn't,
Okay.
a lot of that discussion
I
took
thought
place.
it was that. Thank you.
I was surprised that dredging was as little as it was.
I got another question.
Yes.
So we're fully expended of our $10,000 basically,
Correct.
or at least that, or even more. So how much would you ask that the board consider transferring from any account tonight? Do you have an amount?
So if you're making any transfers, I would suggest that you would make a motion for that $2,100 for the broadband, from the broadband reserve. And then at this point, I don't feel comfortable saying designating $5,000 out of contingency for legal fees. What I would feel more comfortable doing is as that bill comes, I would bring it to you. And you would make a motion on each individual bill and appropriate that bill specifically out of contingency or make a decision to go to town meeting. I don't want to, because town meeting or contingency are the only other options. And I don't feel comfortable saying, X amount of dollars are contingency for legal fees. I'd rather just to keep that track record and know those bills were paid out.
So you're only really asking us to consider this 2,100 tonight?
Yeah. I mean, that's just something that I came up, that I thought of between writing this and now, and so that would alleviate, $2,100 and drop it down to, 8,000. And then when the January bill comes in, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Carol?
Oh, go ahead, Bob. I think,
What was the amount you wrote down again?
Broadband is 10.5 hours, $2,152.50.
And what was the amount you read?
650.
615.
Yes.
So one question, are we done? Or- yeah. So my question is, what's the arrangement with the legal firm? Do we give them a number not to exceed? How do we, in other words, we have some ongoing legal cases, so how, have we told them we need to kind of bring it in, or what's the arrangement with them?
So to my knowledge, as long as I work with the town, I have not seen, and I could be wrong because I haven't been in this position that long, that we've exceeded legal fees. Last year, we were at $3,400. I think that we're in a very unusual circumstance where we're experiencing Board of Adjustment and Appeals cases that have eaten such a big chunk, but there's no particular agreement with legal saying, if we exceed. Natalie's aware that we've reached our limit, and so I've limited my communication with her. I reach out to MMA legal with any specific questions. But there are things like the email that I forwarded you with things that she's dealing with report that I have nothing to do with my communication with her, which is why at this point, it would be bill by bill that would get paid until we get.
Yeah, we have, I think, on Hawaii, we exceeded the legal fees and we had to agree. So it has happened in the past.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, I just would wanted to understand the process. So there's going to be some expenses that in a sense, we don't have a lot of control over. But whether or not Natalie attends the meeting or not might be something that we have control over.
Yes.
So I think obviously, maybe trying to keep it as minimal as necessary would make sense.
I know it every year, at the end of the year, we check all the warrants before it goes to town meeting.
Yes.
So that's an expense there, so.
The warrant articles
Yeah,
are
that's
going
all.
every year.
I would agree, and I appreciate, because as you said, you're trying to be watchful and minimize the usage. So,
make a motion that we allocate $2,152.50 from the broadband reserve account and $615 from the dredging reserve account into the legal expense category to compensate for legal expenses for those two capital projects.
Can you repeat the end?
Sorry, but
A little slower.
I move that we allocate $2,152.50 from broadband reserve account and $615 from the dredging reserve account into the legal expenses account to compensate for legal expenses to date for those capital projects.
Capital
Project.
project. Well, you make a motion to use reserve funds, so.
So going from reserves to,
What I would do is, in the Trio world, I would do a journal entry specific to the bills and do it that way. So it wouldn't be moving. It's hard, it's really hard to
I understand.
explain.
Okay. All right. Mark?
Were you asking if it's okay for us to pull out of reserve the departmental?
Yeah,
Correct. Yeah, either way, either department. I thought we could do departmental to department to department.
Well, in this case,
Do
in this case, I think it's staying within the descriptive expected use by the voters because expenses directly are related to legal issues and preparation of.
and I can double check with him when we go. What I read, I think we're good, because I'm gonna appropriate and do the journal entry to the bills, so it's, but I will double check, just to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Any other comments? Any comments from the public? All in favor? All right. Carol?
And before we leave legal, I just wanted to check, I did look at, I think when we get into the budget process, we may want to look at, it's legal services, it doesn't necessarily mean it's limited to one attorney or firm. And I noticed that most communities, most of the budgets I looked at, the town budgets, just have legal services under the administration. It isn't compartmentalized by like planning board or appeals, coastal waters. So I think that's something we might want to look at. Since we want to consolidate it as a single zone. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is I do think, well, I guess, I guess I'll just do what I have to say. Anyway, it's fine. But anyway, I think that's one thing we should look at is because it would give us more flexibility. In other words, the planning board, I think, has a budget of $3 grand or something.
Yeah, it's not-
Well, for legal, but in other words,
Legally,
having it
it's
all
all
in one pot, if it's the planning board that needs it 1 year, if it's the town that needs it, administration, I just think it gives us more flexibility, and I talked with the town of Cape Cod, and that's how they do it. Because it makes it easier. The only other separate spot would be in the school department, where they have their own legal. It's just something we should think about. But I also wanted to say, I thank Jay for having enough foresight to increase the budget for the bonds, knowing that we were really going to have land use problems. So it's really great.
And he actually emailed me this afternoon with the same recommendation.
Bob
I had
had-
just done this map and emailed with very similar suggestions. So, good to know he's still watching.
All right. Any other comments? All right, moving on. 23-003 to discuss budget goals and priorities. So, notice on our budget. So we basically, this is just to see where we're going for this year, what our plans are, if we have certain goals or certain things that we want to look at more closely, just anything. So, next week, we'll be presenting the first budget with with Pete being sick, and so that through some of the information, so still compiling and moving around some, inputting some numbers and stuff like that, so we should have it by Friday.
Yes, well, I have it pretty much.
In the next budget, in the next packet.
And the budget, so the report as you're used to will be the same exact thing. There is gonna be one difference that is gonna have to be something to get used to. If you recall, the town budget was divided into each department, so administration, code enforcement, assessor, and so forth. The school was just a constant run-on 8-page or 3-page document of 8,000 and every single number underneath it. Especially with last year's budget, it was very difficult, for the board to understand from the school and so forth, and through a lot of communication with the school board chair and the superintendent. What I did with this budget is I created a school having its own department. So what they'll have is they'll have an administrative department, a superintendent department, transportation department. So it'll be easier to look at and understand under the school budget which departments and how much is expended. The big challenge for that is the way that the system generates the reports under those departments. With the new departments, it is appearing that it's a brand new department that has never existed, so it's not going to have those 2 or 3 years of history. So what I will have is the ongoing 8,000s. So then the fiscal year 23 budget number is still accurate, and it's not as messed up with the fiscal year 24. So I know that might be confusing, but in long term, I think it is going to be. It'll be easier for the selectmen to understand the school budget and for the school board to have the same reporting as the town has always had.
So you were just describing the new revised school budget.
Which will look just like the town.
Yeah, and I already asked you this, so forgive me. I'm just making sure that I'm being clear. In our budget with the department, that's going to show a couple of years of history and then
Yeah,
recommended.
2 years actual, 1 year actual, current year budget, year-to-date percentage.
And then the capital side of the budget, will that have like fire truck reserve, whatever the number is, 70,000, goal of 250,000, purchase in 2025? I'm just making these numbers up. Will it have that level of detail or no?
So, like for example, what I did with debt services, I put in, the school renovation, the plow truck, broadband, dredging. And what I did under each category is I put in the date payoff. So then in talking, we know that, that the bond bank is due in 27 for this session. I am able to put notes under any line item that you
I
want.
guess that's what I'm referring to.
And that's if you have specific
Yeah,
ones.
well, I would love, if the fire department feels that we need to, I'm just using that as an example. If they feel that we need to purchase their next truck by 2025 or 26 or 24 or 27 or whatever it is, it would be nice to have that in writing as a recommendation from Ralph and his department, and how much they're expecting that needs to be,
Okay.
so that we can see where we are now or having the bond.
Yeah.
See what I mean? I don't need to put more work on, but you'll be talking to the departments anyway.
Yeah, and that's, so that, I won't have all that information in the draft, in the first one,
And I
but
understand.
yeah, that, I'm trying to put as much detail on it as possible, so it's very transparent with the money.
Are we talking about our individual priorities tonight or not for the board? What does that mean?
Whichever one it is.
Okay.
Budget goals and priorities, doesn't matter if it's the whole board or just individuals, so.
Do you mind if I speak? Oh, Carol.
I just have a question before we leave this. So the budget that you're gonna give us, Steve, the fiscal year 24 numbers are based on estimates from the departments of what they're gonna need, or where do those numbers come from?
So for the first draft, what you're gonna get, the 24 numbers, what I did is I have, spent the last number of days going through pretty much every department line, and if there are certain things, that need to go over, I either average, there's a couple where I just simply averaged the last, 3 years and went closer to that. Like there was one where we were over budgeting and, we could have eliminated $1,500. With some of them, like for instance, technology line, we have some anticipated expenses for like the fire department to get a new computer. So I have quotes coming in for those things. With the insurances,
Yeah,
some of the debt I already know.
So for health insurance, do you have the number you incorporated? You will have incorporated what is the health insurance increase?
Correct.
So do you know what that is?
What, with the health insurance, one of those calculations we have effective January, what the rate is. And then because
Oh, it's a calendar.
it's a calendar year, I anticipate, like this year is 12% increase.
12?
Yes, for health insurance. And so, I think it's, 4 to 6%, I think, change.
So when you add that, so my question is, when I see the budget, am I gonna know that, is there somewhere that it's gonna say this is like a 12%, this includes a 12% increase for health insurance or some kind of summary so we know what's already?
With a lot of the budget lines, if they're being increased, I put a note providing. So, with, like the salaries nationwide, I think it's 8%. Maine Municipal always does a survey and they, release that with a lot of towns put in what they're anticipating. There are some towns that are doing like 12%. And so I took, look at the average and then so it's any changes, I try to put a note in or provide like salary changes, health insurance. I have a binder where I collect all the information.
But are those notes carried forward onto the spreadsheet that we'll be seeing?
Yeah, so like, for example, under wages, I'll do, anticipated increase based on a 5% COLA increase.
Also, during the budget, we go line by line.
No, I understand,
So,
but
no, I just letting you know, we do, and then we ask questions. Sometimes the whatever notes she writes in there is not clear,
But the comments will definitely help us get an initial understanding.
They help me, and I spent a lot of time talking with Marjorie last year when I did it, and I actually went back to a couple of years of previously when she did the budgets and pulled out, she had a lot of Excel documents and a lot of calculations. And so I've tried using a lot of that to put that in. And like simply with the debt, knowing when those debts get paid off, that helps me have the mistakes.
right, with this full budget, it's always clear when increases have been incorporated. That's my experience, so that's what I'm asking. And then the other thing is, I think we do have to be careful, since we're really the first year out of COVID. The expenses in the prior couple of years might be kind of not totally, normal for operations. So in particular, there may be some things we didn't expend money on because we weren't fully functioning. So I think we have to be careful, that we don't underestimate some things.
Yeah, training, a lot of the items for training have to be used in 2 or 3 years, and that's hard to anticipate.
All right, so let's go back to the suggestion about budgets and goals. Mark had an idea or goals. And
No, I was just gonna give you my goals and priorities. I really don't wanna hear 'em. My goal every year is to not raise the budget. I'm not being facetious. But at the same time, I recognize that costs go up with the index and inflation and stuff. But I would ask that we all, when you sit with your department heads, speaker, I would ask for consideration of looking at the total department budget, and if they see lines that are not being used, they give them some thought of things they could do with a little less, especially if they have to increase lines on the other side of the page. And I would ask the same thing of the select board thoughtfully, not just the lower numbers, but just give them some real thought. To me, the challenge comes when you get to the capital budget. That's where you can really kick the can down the road and let your infrastructure fall apart and save money or move some things forward. I didn't totally agree with the budget that we pushed to the people last year, but looking back and reflecting on it, even though it raised some people's taxes some, I thought that the board and the town did a decent job presenting, and it's going to move some projects and infrastructure ahead, and I think that's Carol's point, Carol's point. Having said that, I will probably be helping Beacon make one recommendation, which kicks the can down the road a little bit, and that's paving. And the only reason I'm going to recommend that we don't finish chip sealing and paving the roads, we're not going to have this stretch ready for double chip seal or whatever we can do anyway. And after speaking with the foreman of the paving company, if we pave those roads that we just paved and then come back and pave this, we're going to spend a premium. So I think, it would be better to wait and put part of the money away in capital. So I certainly want to hear what the departments and the town administrator bring to us. I certainly want them to have what they need to operate and stay fluid and improve. But I don't want to keep raising things for the people of the island.
Bob?
I agree with everything Mark said. And also related to roads, I would ask that I'm not sure if this is a capital item or an expense item, probably expense. I would ask that we have enough of the appropriate material to continually shore up the edges of the pavement, the shoulders, if you will, in order to protect the pavement. Pavement's an investment, and it's an ongoing battle, because every time you have a big rainstorm, something's going to wash it away. But the more we protect those shoulders, the less money we're going to have to spend on pavement down the road. So that's one big one I would put out there. The second would be Venice. We don't yet know what we're going to do at Venice, but we need to put some money aside. Maybe what we have in there is enough. I can't doubt it. I would mention, I was going to bring this up in communications, but since I'm talking about Venice, I did notice he was down there the other day. I think he had your truck, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was down there doing his recordings, setting digital points, if you will. That doesn't mean it's close to getting us a report. It takes them a while to collate the data and then write stuff up. But at least we know that's moving forward. But those are the two things that I wanted to bring out: was shoulders and Venice.
Well, I guess I sort of read this literally and thought we were supposed to have some specific goals. I guess to start with, I think, I spent a fair amount of time looking at what other towns have done for budget processes and what we did historically. And I think one thing we've gotten away from doing is sort of doing a preliminary calculation of the mill rate and sort of getting us, communicating with the community about kind of what the tax impact is. And I think I'd like to if the board agrees, that's one recommendation I have is sort of, to Mark's point, sort of having a sense of what does it mean for a home. I looked at the town of Long Island's site for their budget, and it's very informative. They have a presentation where they go through the budgets for the past 5 years. They talk about how the mill rates changed, how the assessments changed, and sort of just a reflection. I think it's very transparent and basically really communicates to the community, how the money has, how the tax rate in particular has changed and how the money is being spent in the community proportionally. And they include, big capital items that have been included or need to be considered. And so I'd like to see a more comprehensive public presentation at the end of the budget process. I think the school board did something last year, and I'd be happy to put it together, but I think we should do the same thing. And I think the way we did it in the beginning, I'm talking more like 2010, we had a lot more detail available to the public. And I kind of would like to go back to that level of detail. And so in terms of, my specific goals would be to look at the solid waste budget closely and to see, if there's a way, rather than increase the budget for 2024, really look at how it was, spent in the past couple of years and see if there's a way we can adjust our operations to save some money there. I think the capital improvement, like Mark said, I think that's really where and I think there are some capital improvements that aren't reflected in that thing. And I think there was sort of a schedule like Mark described where people had projected out replacement timeframes. So I found an older capital plan that's really a spreadsheet, but I think we might want to resurrect that. Because coming into the Board of Selectmen, I see the reserve funds, but I don't have a good concept of, are we talking 2 years, 5 years, 20 years? And do we have enough money? Are we saving on a schedule that's going to accomplish the goal? Because we often make decisions right at the end that we're not going to put as much money in. And I don't know what that means because I don't know what the goal and the time is. So I think we need at least the total financial goal and then the time frame that we expect to need to accomplish that goal. And then that would also help us, and then maybe identifying in that process how to, which ones might be worth going after outside funds, like Mark mentioned, the floats, for example. But there's so much funding out there right now, but I think we can't go after it all, and I think we might want to target that. So that's a big thing for me, is sort of the capital budget. And the other thing is, it's became apparent to me as I read the comp plan and read through previous multiple documents that we have generated as a community and the planning board, the two priorities in the town that we have not taken any action on is affordable housing and open space. And last year at town meeting, an individual got up and, made a motion to appropriate money for, I guess it was for, I don't remember exactly the term, but conservation. And I think maybe that to me is a message that maybe we should be doing more on that. So I'd like to include that in the discussion during the budget process. And I have to say my overarching goal is trying to sustain the year-round community here. And I feel like we're swimming against the tide quite a bit. And I hope that as we go through the budget process, we can kind of think about, as we plan for the future, I hope we're planning for a future with a year-round community. And I think some of the decisions we make could be really important along those lines. I think the pressures are extreme, for sort of the gentrification of this community. So those are kind of my big goals. And then because we have this climate resiliency committee, I think what a lot of communities have done, and I would think we should do this too, is to sort of, get their recommendations. For example, the municipal grant fund for, improvements that could be used. It might be that we can have them do some legwork on where the options are to get some money to do even minor improvements, lighting, I mean, we can get money to improve the lighting, which would save us money if we use LED lighting, so those kinds of things. So those are kind of my primary things. Really, it comes down to, like Mark said, a lot of the capital improvement budget. And I think also I'd like to look at historically, and we did this once before after like 5 years, but I'd like to look at the budget trends, sort of, you know, what portions have gone up and how much, and also look at how our assessment has gone up and how our, you know, even if our tax rate doesn't change, but our valuation goes up, even if we keep the tax rate the same, we might be spending more money. And my personal objective would be, if the evaluation's going up, can we put more of that money into capital rather than just operational expenditures? Because then you never kind of go backwards. You know what I mean? So it's like, if your salary increases, do you put it in savings or do you spend it? And that's kind of, I would like to see if we could practice some fiscal, you know, control, that maybe we could start swapping away a little more money on capital. Because those, we have some huge ticket items coming down the pipe. I mean, and I'm not sure they're all reflected in the capital. And I'd be happy to take on sort of the first, with a member of my household, I think I can take a stab at coming up with a spreadsheet that reflects the, you know, existing capital, and then we can look at it for, you know, if there's other stuff we get to add. Because I think that's the staggering challenge for me. Stone pier, you know, fire department, you know, and if we wanted to protect any property, you know, storm damage, all these things, we're talking multi-millions.
Just a very quick question. Is it accurate to say that this is the way it kind of works with the valuation? So we do our budget process, we finalize our budget along with the school department. We kind of know we're close to where we want to be for presenting the numbers to the people. But the actual calculation of valuation by Jackie does not happen until after town meeting. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right.
That is correct. I do have an Excel document where I plug in all the numbers prior to that to get an idea of what it's going to be, to try to see, you know, what the expectation is. And
And that's why, primary reason I asked that question, and I would be glad to talk with you, Carol, about how you would like to see your idea of the final presentation to the people. But they're ultimately going to ask the question.
Right.
Are the taxes going up?
Right, and
Is the mill rate going up?
and what most towns do is they say for, you know, $200,000 house, it's $200, for a $400,000 house, you know, they kind of give you a range so you know how much your own tax bill is going to change.
Right.
And so I think sort of presenting it in that way so that people can understand it. And I mean, it's maybe not popular to say this, but I feel also an obligation because we're you know, residents of 350 people, but our tax base is supported by a non-resident population that contributes, you know, the large percentage of the revenue. So I feel an obligation to sort of be as transparent as possible and to be as conscientious as possible, because we are not struggling as much as other small communities because of that situation.
I would agree with that.
we do have a spreadsheet that I think has exactly what you're referring to. Marjorie has historically shared that in her budget process. I looked through and she had it in there. Justin didn't have it, and it is something I used with her towards the end of the last budget. I didn't bring it to the selectmen because I wasn't comfortable in knowing it, but she helped me just to determine like per, you know, it would go up X amount of dollars per thousand. So I think we're a lot closer to that than,
Right, and we used to share that, but I just think we should
Yeah,
do it again.
yeah.
'Cause
no,
that's-
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
Yeah, I agree. So didn't our mill rate go from like $16.40 down to $12.50?
I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, 16.4 to 12.5.
And so,
Cause I had my wife ask me, what's our tax bill gonna be? Aren't they going up? Everybody's saying it's going up. And I'm like, I wish I could answer the question. I said, I'll take a guess, but ours is gonna go up $400. I think it went up $240.
Sorry, Bob, I didn't make that first.
No, it's fine. I have another question. Go ahead.
Two things. One, I think the idea of getting back into the habit of a capital plan being the tool that we use to inform what our capital budget is for this year. But a capital plan that goes out at least 5 years into the future is critical. I think we have to do that anytime, but especially now, given these monumental projects that are in front of us. Stone Pier and new safety building being the two big ones that I can think of. So really support that idea. I'm willing to work on that to help in any way I can. And second question, Vika, what we'll see, is it in the form of an actual spreadsheet or is it output from Trio?
It's an output.
It's an output from Trio.
Probably get it.
It could be transferred into an Excel doc.
That's fine. I know that. My question is, can Trio show us 5 years history in that output that we're going to see? Or 3 years history?
3, so with the budget process, typically, or historically, the last few years, it's been 2 years actual, last 1 year actual, the current year budget, the year to date, the proposed upcoming budget, and the difference from the, yeah. So this is.
One numbers, this is what this time is gonna look like.
Shoot, we're done.
And
All right, Carol.
these with every packet.
So it's 2 years prior plus the year we're in, basically.
And then project.
But it could be 3. It had, you can go up, you can do 3. It just, all these numbers get smaller.
So, Carol?
Well, I have a question on the application for, I don't know what it was called, but where they freeze the taxes, freeze your taxes if you're over 65. How many applications did you have for that?
We had over
About
50 applications.
50? That's
We had a
all?
lot.
Interesting. I thought you'd have more. And then this,
50, 60, I stopped counting towards.
but I
the end.
mean, and how many resident taxpayers are there?
I don't know that number off the top of my head.
So I was just wondering what percentage of that. So theoretically, the state reimburses us for the difference?
Yes, yeah, so what they do is they freeze the taxes and for the next tax year, your taxes don't go up. But in our system, it still shows the raise and then the state substitutes the difference.
And our assessor is the one that determines eligibility.
It's the assessor with the work of the town office, because she doesn't know if they're putting on the application whether they say that that's their true birth or not. So when she's here next time, we're gonna go through the applications and kind of figure out to make sure, I mean, we know everybody comes in for the most part, so we know if they're, lying about age or not. We can compare it to the voter registrar list.
Nobody wants to.
And then we're gonna put the information into the Trio system, so we'll have a little bit better understanding of the number. And it's still such a new thing that I think Trio and the state are still trying to figure out how to be compatible with it. So.
Well, in the state, they put right now, there's no income cap. You can be a bazillionaire and
Yeah.
qualify, but the state may, this year in the legislature, may change that either on the property valuation or the income. Because it is, we don't really want to subsidize it.
And I'm sorry, I'll be clear. Are they notified whether they are successful with their application or not by mail?
That is still a process that I'm not sure what will happen.
Good, thank you.
But that shouldn't affect our budgetary bottom line.
No, it should not.
All right, so my goals, priorities are, once again, like Mark said, budget, close to 0 raise. Stone Pier, you know, look at where we're at with that capital essentially. The legal budget, the bargaining situation, the transfer station situation, road maintenance, not just the size of the roads, but just road maintenance in general, adding more gravel on the roads, bigger culverts, branches in the roads, or the overhanging branches that are going into the road. And also the facility committee, looking at their proposal and stuff for the fire chief. Other than that, pretty much the same things that you guys said. All right. Anything else to add? Next week, we'll be presented with the budget. We should have it on Friday. Please don't nitpick the thing. It's gonna be, we'll nitpick it enough. If you have areas of concern or questions like that, Mark, are we gonna be able to, so what will happen next meeting, I'll hand over the floor to Mark, and he takes over for the budget. Are we gonna be able to ask questions on specific line items that we show concerns on?
Yeah, I mean, basically what this says is budget workshop for next week. First draft of budget presented along with capital expenditure. What that means to me is this is the first time that you've seen the budget. You've got a few days as of receiving it on Friday to give it your first glance. I don't expect next week we will dance down through every department and dance through the capital list, but it would be a good place for you to start with some things that you're noticing, and maybe we can all make some notes of it as a group so that when we revisit those specific subjects, we can take them up more specifically.
How much time do you want, just for agenda purposes? You want to put in like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour?
I think 30 to 45 minutes is a reasonable first shot. But like I said, if we're talking, when we get to the part where so the following meeting, which is the next budget workshop, excuse me, is Saturday, February 11th, budget workshop, specifically departmental budget. What I would ask is for Vika to be finished with her, sit down with her department heads before that, recommendation from each department. We're assuming what we're seeing. And at that point, we're going to go through every department. Every select person is going to have an opportunity to go through every line item that they're concerned with, the goal of the department. I always ask for a rationale from the department and town administrator if there's a recommendation for especially an increase in some sort of non-animal area, and we usually get that. I would make sure that department heads are wishing to be at the meeting to make a presentation on their department, a quick one, at the February 11th, if they are welcome to do that. But they should know that we're going to move things along, so the presentation should be to the point and brief, and that'll be the first real shot at the departments. And then February 22nd is the second draft of the budget, and it doesn't really specify whether we're doing department only. So I assume we're not doing capital, because the following 25th of February, we're doing budget workshop, which is non-profits and then capital. So is the 25th, Beaker, in your opinion, our first shot at the capital budget?
So The 18th is the first draft in capital, and then, looking at, from what took place last year, that second meeting with the nonprofits and the capital is more concrete numbers towards a real, towards what the selectmen are looking to do.
Yeah, so the problem with combining, without being, not being critical of anything, but the problem like with the 18th, of combining a budget discussion with capital is you sort of mix up the conversation and you get distracted a little bit, but that's okay on next week, unless you want to. We can always add another budget meeting if we decide, especially with capital. I don't mean to minimize department, but capital can really be important. So if we decide, as we start the budget process, we need to add another couple of hours on a weeknight or something. Even if it's not a Wednesday night, we may want to keep that in our back pocket.
Yeah, we usually beat it down to these on the second, on the third draft and the fourth draft. Carol?
So just so I understand what we're getting, so it says capital expenditures on 118. So is that, that's more than the spreadsheet that we're getting with the county balances, right? Is there, so what is it we're gonna get for the capital plan? Is there an actual plan?
It's gonna be the spreadsheet in the past, what we've been given is that spreadsheet of the, with the, the reserve accounts. I do have a spreadsheet that I found, that had been previously used that has some, capital improvements over the next couple of years that, I was gonna look at and try to tweak based on the projection of what we've done the last couple of years to see whether you agree with, the trajectory of what's on that document.
And what about the sort of definition of what the accounts are for?
So in this, in this document, it has a description of them and then also on the reserve account.
What when you say this document?
On the report, the budget report that you'll get, there'll be a line item, so capital improvements, account 910 is dredging,
Yeah.
915 is.
But isn't there sort of a narrative that goes along with, like a paragraph that describes what the account's for? Because we've gone back and checked that in the past, remember?
I have a copy of the latest one that I had found through my budget search that I keep in my budget binder that I.
No, I get that. What I'm looking for is the description of what the account is for. Because it's come up in the past, so can you provide that with the budget? Because I think we should, may want to revisit that. For example, some of these things may need to be described.
For example, floats and ramps versus.
So with a lot of the description from the research that I've done and from talking to Marjorie, the descriptions for the reserve account and kind of, the name of the reserve account and description is appropriated town meeting. So town meeting creates a reserve account and describes what falls under that expenditure.
And
No,
so-
but we could make the recommendation. to
Yes,
change
absolutely.
that
Yeah,
town meeting.
yeah.
So that's what-
Right, and it's you kind of need to know, I remember it came up with a new point in particular. What's allowed and what's not allowed.
So we want that for when?
For the 18th.
18th, okay.
Possible.
You don't necessarily have anything in your information about, we have a capital reserve budget for, say, let's say floats and ramps. And that's for a 5-year time frame for a total, is there a goal of a total amount? We don't have anything like that.
Don't believe so.
The closest thing that I found to something like that for looking is, capital plan and priority risk. And this looks like something that Justin, I think, had started with just an idea of through his time, but the selectmen had worked on in the direction of things. And so, like I said, that's what I pulled up and found.
And
Yeah,
then,
you can pass that, put it in there too. I mean, we can tweak the numbers. We personally can tweak the numbers on that. if we wanted.
yeah, because there are some back when you look, there are some older ones where there's a fair amount of information, and maybe we can.
We had some specific notes attached to specific capital items such as the rescue vehicle, the fire
Right.
truck, the solar array, and it would show a certain date of purchase goal. It would show the amount, and it would show the recommended amount to put away for a number of years.
Perfect.
But we didn't get that far on it, Carol, to be quite honestly. We didn't do it on every item.
How does it work with like the fire department and public works, and then you might need a vehicle replacement down the line? Do you ask them, like, where your capital needs, and they tell you?
They come up with, usually they sit down with a TA and then they come up with wants and needs. And
But that includes capital, not just operation.
All right. Anything else?
I know one thing.
Yes.
I'm gonna be out of town on the 11th. Can we push it to the 4th? Is it possible?
11th of
February, Saturday, the 11th. Budget workshop.
I'm
You're not
gone,
here, right?
I'm going on a trip. And we're coming back that night,
Yeah, we don't want to do
so I
that.
won't be able to attend the budget meeting.
I think we need to leave that.
Um, I can't.
I think we changed this to accommodate your schedule, so.
Following Saturday.
So
February
the 18th, but then we have on the 22nd, that second draft, and
Yeah.
we would need that.
Is it possible on the 11th to have a budget workshop without Vika being present? I don't know.
Just some certain questions she has more.
We pile those questions up. We
Do not feel comfortable with that first meeting not being present. We had Chris taking our recommendations to cut something.
I mean, the biggest concern about me not being there is if, because it's the department budget, if you have specific questions about how I came up with that number, or, and it would be hard for me to predict those questions for you ahead of time.
Well, I don't think we can expect you to show up the next day after flying back from Mexico.
Can we do it on a Wednesday, that Wednesday before?
Wednesday, the 8th.
Yeah, instead of a Saturday?
At 4 hours carved out.
Yeah, we need a lot of time. That's a lot.
Say that again.
If we moved it to Wednesday, the 8th, as Vika suggested, we have 4 hours currently for each of these budget workshops on Saturdays. So if we tried to do it on Wednesday, if we started at 6, we wouldn't finish at 10. If we start at 5, that's going to cause the work schedules.
Maybe we split it into two 2-hour sessions. If we have to do a weekday, I gotta work full day, I don't wanna. We can split it into two 2-hour sessions. Or we'll go on Saturday. That seems to be the two.
I mean, if you're comfortable doing it with me not being here on that Saturday, knowing that I will be able to answer certain questions, but one thing that I found helpful last year is occasionally after these meetings, you know, you would, like Mark individually would shoot me an email. Can you provide at the next meeting more information about this line or that line? So I'd be happy if you do have specific questions that, that you can, you know, provide with a follow-up
So-
email, and that I can answer them for the, because there is a pretty good gap between the meetings for me to put that information in. So if you're comfortable.
Just stick
with
with
it.
Saturday.
So I'm sorry, we're talking about the 11th with just the department budgets.
Correct.
So how about if we decide to still do it on that date without you, you're gonna still have time to meet with each department.
Yeah, so my plan is to meet with each department, have the department as much as I possibly can for each of them put in. It just, my concern is if you have specific questions.
And what if you took each department very quickly that, you know, let's just pick solid waste and public works for 2 examples. Solid waste says to you, solid waste division says to you, you think we can operate with the same amount of money, but so we need to lower this and up this and move around. We need more money, whatever the conclusion is. What if you just have them help you draft a quick supporting memo of how that.
That's fine. I mean, I can provide as much information as I can that's needed.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you have questions, I mean,
So I think you're right. I think we're gonna have to just go with that meeting.
that's
And
fine.
also, I mean, also, you'll be available the week prior.
Yes, I'm gonna be gone, that Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
So I mean, if we have questions, I'm assuming we'll get that budget. you know,
That
Monday.
budget will be finalized on Thursday, because I'll be gone that Friday, so you'll get it even earlier.
What do you know about for Saturday? No.
So, yeah, so you'll have it before during that week, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that way we'll have a chance to review it quickly. And if we have any real concerns, we can send her an email before the meeting, so hopefully we can get it.
So just to clarify, if I send an email about the department budget question, I would include her and all of you in that email.
No.
Last year, in this kind of conversation, you would typically just email it to me, or sometimes include the chair.
The only reason I asked that question is I'm not trying to have a meeting.
Yep.
On an email, but I'm also not trying to not show the other participants, the other members, what I'm asking.
Yeah.
So I understand it's close to a line of.
And that's what last year, looking, because I went back and I looked at some of the common communication and how it took, and it was typically, if the selectman had a question, they would CC it the chair, so that another selectman was aware of it.
But I'm certainly free to share that email then separately with.
Yeah, because I think the biggest thing we're trying to avoid is,
Yeah.
and I mean, the policy can be changed, or the ordinance to make it so that's.
I don't think it's an ordinance.
It's one of the policies where it says email, phone, coffee break, if there's. a
Yeah, I think I want to follow up with them a little bit about this, because it seems like we're
Yeah.
really hamstringing.
Well, I didn't mean to open up.
No, but I agree, and I think the more, several boards, you know, I talked to Vika about getting, should be kind of big email. And I noticed that a lot of select boards use an email that is Selectmen, which I think is a great idea, town of, you know, freedom. And that way it goes to everybody. And it's, you know, it's also copied onto the town server. It's, you know, if it's a FOIA request, anybody can get it. And personally, just like code enforcement officer, town administrator, I kind of think you might want to go that route. So I have to believe it's okay to send emails all of them at the same time. So I will try to track that down, because
We'll look at it.
we all just got that email tonight, and I haven't even read it at the end of the day from the lawyer, because he had our email addresses wrong or something. And, you know, it is kind of a mess, the current system, it's a mess.
And that is something that is anticipated for an increase in the.
But we might only need one email for the board.
So we're bogged down.
Oh, yeah, that's all right, needed discussion. All right, so. are we all
So can I
set?
ask just one more question on the nonprofit presentation?
Yep.
Well, sorry,
No,
but I haven't
no,
done
no,
this
this is what we're here
before.
for, no, just.
It doesn't make me feel like I should be asking questions.
No,
Bob,
you're fine, I'm sorry.
What is it you require them for their presentation?
Can't remember the exact, thing that we asked.
Well, we asked them for their expense report, there's some spreadsheets, and how to, to show us how they're running their nonprofit. And then we have them make a presentation of how they're doing, how the numbers are doing, why they're requesting the same amount or a little bit more, and then we ask specific questions.
So they're physically here for the presentation.
Yes.
And so the rec center, the library, the commons, the hall,
Commons will not be here.
okay, the hall,
Yeah,
Home library,
that's it. gentlemen.
I believe so.
Do we have that information ahead of time though?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you wanna feel like going down, rabbit hole on our website, if you go to previous fiscal years and kind of look at, because these budget dates are very similar to last year's. And on the website, it'll say, budget workshop or budget discussion. You could see in the packet kind of the description of what the nonprofits provide, because we put all that in the packet with the information.
All right, Paul.
Question about board, but planning board, board of appeals, and coastal waters. Do they just work with you, Vika, and you bring it to us, or do they come to a meeting the way nonprofits do? How does that work?
So the only, currently planning board is, the only, board that has its own department. We did include, Board of Adjustment and Appeals for this round in it. But as far as, coastal waters, or any other board, there's a policy where they have to go through the selectmen and make a recommendation for any expenditures.
Yeah. But it's only planning board is the only one of those boards that has.
Yeah,
a line.
and like last year's example was you sent me an email and said, and what I did is I did change the budget, and when it came time to planning board budget, any questions or comments, they said, an email was provided, they wanted to keep it the same.
Thanks.
Anything else? All right, moving on to communications. So we got a whole bunch of communications from a couple of boards. I didn't get a chance to read them both. Two or three, I don't know. But anyway, so I believe they all have to do with the property.
stop work order. That button? Yeah. Are you the individual that would be the one that would issue or not stop work order? It wouldn't be this body, correct? It would be me, yeah. Thank you.
So I was wondering if the board was interested in putting something on the next agenda for discussion or for the key, the legal. I don't know exactly the whole.
I think we should have two agenda items. One should be to talk about where we are with the EV situation, and the other would be to talk about where we are with the tower and Valley situation. Except for the thoughts?
It would be a very brief description of where we are presently, correct?
At least for the McKee gallery situation. Given that Fowler has not filed legal appeal, we're going to talk about this in the executive session. So let's wait and talk about it.
So should we ask the lawyer to give us a brief description of where we at based on the lawyers and all that good stuff?
I think we have a meeting.
We have a meeting.
Did share a few times prior with a description of where things stood, and I think it's very similar, other than these additional communications. and then, now the keys have them where. So I just said, like I said earlier, I just feel more comfortable compiling all of the communications that were shared so quickly to the meeting and then have it, properly presented, so.
If we have that be an agenda item, I would assume that those letters would be part of the packet and therefore be public information. Is that correct? Yeah. I think that's appropriate.
Yeah,
Keep rumors from going.
that was the kind of the path that I was going. The attorney made present that, to share it in a meeting, I just don't think it was appropriate to do less than 24 hours before a meeting. And I wanted to take the proper steps and present that information.
Yeah, relative to your question, though, I would say unless something else happens that's momentous, given our budget situation, we've already got the advice from the attorney and seen at this point. It's very hard.
Yeah.
So in terms of the entire file on the cottage road situation, if I wanted to review that file, is it digital or do I have to come in the office? Because I've certainly seen all the lawyer letters, but I actually haven't looked at the files. So if
The
I
files
want,
in the office.
it's you had sent, have you sent digital copies of the files to the attorneys? So can you provide that to me so that I don't have to come in the office?
Quick question. So you're talking about what was sent via the request for information? of
Yeah.
Permitting, so that has been sent to all the attorneys, but since then, that request, there has been additional correspondence from the attorneys, but also additional permit requests from applicants.
Okay, so I guess, is it a procedure that we are digitizing the files as we go, or what's the process?
We don't have a procedure. They're all in the file in the office.
You wait until somebody asks to digitize, is that how you?
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you could if you could send me everything that you have digitized, that would be helpful. That would save the amount of time I could spend in the office, and then I'll come in. And do I need to make an appointment, or how does it work to look at the file in the office?
You don't have to make an appointment. You come in, you just pull the file and you can go through it. People do it all the time.
All right, any
Chair,
other
one, if I can real quick on this topic. There's been recent activity in relation to this recent application that have been applied for, and if you're making it a future agenda item, I'm in a position of I need legal, support on the questions that you were going to ask me in that session due to the recent applications that we received. So I know you don't want to spend any money on legal, but I'm going to sit in that meeting and tell you I need to check the town attorney. I'm not quite sure what our correct path forward is due to the BAA and now the subsequent action of new applications coming in for that property.
I think maybe, I don't know.
Let's talk about this.
Well, and I think maybe an update on where we're at, which maybe you can't answer the questions, right? But then we say, yeah, we do need to check with the attorney. I think maybe one step would be to get up to speed. The next step would be to decide what we need to do. Just because we need to be conscientious about it.
I agree with that. And if I may, with respect to the Dowdy Fowler appeal situation over on North Road, I understand that so far there has been no receipt of an appeal from Superior Court by Mr. Fowler. That's accurate so far.
We haven't received anything, but Justin Dowdy said he called before today.
And if that is not received going forward from now, is the situation, in your opinion, in your hands or this board's hands or both?
I think it's both. I need to know, I think we discussed it.
I know this is not on the agenda. I feel wrong talking about this with it not being on the agenda. So, because if we haven't noticed it on the agenda, then interested parties are not here.
I retract my question.
Sorry.
No, you're fine, you're right. So back to communication.
So you know what,
Yeah, run commu-
Oh,
So
they're not
there's
even on
any other
communication.
communications? All right.
I got an email from Paul Gillespie, over a week ago, and I haven't had time to follow up on it yet, but I will. It appears that the DEP has money to reimburse people for the cost of recycling, including transportation of recycled goods. So I'll follow up on it and hand it back to Vika and the, committee.
yeah, and so I did attend a portion of the seminar on that. We need to participate in the process in order to get reimbursed. Or something that's called, I can send you the link. But they basically passed a law about packaging, if you remember, like a year ago, and this is their attempt to make the producers pay the cost of disposal. So, but you have to get in the loop now in order for the municipality to be eligible for. And I think for us, the other thing is they want to understand kind of what challenges we face, and I think we should, and I did talk with the Island Institute about this today, I think we should emphasize the fact that not only do we have the whole barging cost, which is not insignificant. So I think we have to call out the fact that we have an extraordinary cost. Because we're gonna get it off yet. I don't know who's gonna take that role on, but somebody should be participating.
Oh,
Glad you did.
Yeah, and again, Paul just forwarded me some notice that we read online. Should I follow up on that notice and bring it back to you guys, or?
Yeah, if you want, if you guys are interested, put it in,
Be sort of under the purview of solid waste eventually.
All right, I'll make the initial call and then dump it back to you guys.
Right. And then
Another
we'll
one
put it
was, under communications. Oh, I mentioned earlier that I ran across, the survey of events.
Yep.
And then the last one was, I think this is appropriate for communications. Let me know if it's not, but Bo and I had a meeting with the Hook group 2 nights ago. And we are waiting for input from the Hook group before moving forward, and they hope to meet in the middle of February. So the drawings on the wetland analysis of where there is wetland and where there is not wetland, we provided the group with drawings that Carol provided in GIS that show where different kinds of parking could be in the non-wetland area in what we've been calling Zone 1, which is outside of the coastal barrier resource system. And there was, I would call it a positive response to those drawings, but the Indian Island Corporation has some work and learning to do with their membership to decide where they want to go with all this. And it's complicated even further by the result of the storm. We've been kind of shocked at what happened with us.
Suggestion that we have it as an agenda item in the future, just an update, just because I know Indian Island is such a big topic in.
Understanding item?
Items, just so that way, I know people look at, just so that way, if someone's interested,
I think it's
because by this time, a lot of people are probably off, so I think that it's
So we
fair.
put it under town reports.
Yeah,
Be like,
I can do that under, yeah.
it'd be like committee update or something.
That'd be great.
Committee
Yep.
updates.
And some weeks there might be not, some meetings there might be nothing. But
Yeah,
that's all I had for question.
Let's start doing that. On that one, on the town reports,
TA report.
on the town reports, the number 3, we'll just put,
Yeah,
committee updates.
yeah, that's just so that way there's something.
All right, anything else? We've got some correspondence from.
I have a
States.
correspondence and I just, with the budget and that's gonna share them next week, but yeah, the aquaculture will be. With our next week.
Is that been scheduled?
Yeah, it's scheduled for the 31st, I think you agreed on, 6 to 7, 31st. It's on our website, and so we're meeting with her for the last minute logistics.
That's here?
so.
Public.
Tuesday, the 31st at 6 p.m.
Yeah,
Share the other ones.
I have not compiled them enough. I need,
All right,
I'm
fine.
still working on it.
No problem.
Sorry.
Anything else? All right, moving on to approve minutes from December 13th, December 21st, and December 31st, 2022. Wait a second.
Second.
Are there any comments?
And I didn't check, but Jen had comments on December 31st.
Yes.
So those got in there.
Yep.
Anything else? All in favor? Moving on to items to be placed on the future agenda. I got the legal for McKee and Dowdy,
We need legal.
Update.
just an update,
Oh,
to talk about that. Yeah. Budget.
Committee members. Yeah, we'll be in executive session for that.
That's an executive session. Why is that?
Whether you accept or deny somebody, you don't want, you don't want somebody. You don't talk about somebody
Yeah, okay.
negatively or positively.
Suggestion, can I have the committee chairs in question be part of this discussion?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why we couldn't.
I would have to double check with legal about that. Typically with personnel, the person you're discussing, it has to be asked permission to join, but, other people cannot be a part of those discussions.
It's not personal.
It would fall under personnel, unfortunately.
Personnel is legal and contractual relationship that involves employment. A volunteer on board is not personal. But please ask MMA if there's any reason why board chairs could not be part of the discussion about board membership. It seems, as a former board chair, I've never understood why couldn't be part of that. conversation.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Well, question, are these board chairs that you're trying to up for renomination?
No, this is, I'm assuming this is like the planning board needs another member. And somebody has signed up, somebody has filled out the form, and we're gonna talk about whether that person would be appropriate for that board. When we're having that conversation, my suggestion is that the chair of that board be part of that conversation.
So if we do it that way, if you're saying that that would not be a personnel matter, then it's not executive session. According to the list that we got for, legal office, justifying executive session. Personal matters, only one, would.
So this idea that we do this in executive session as something we've always done, or
Done it since I've been part of this board. Mark?
In my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, in my opinion, I don't think it's appropriate in a public setting to say why someone may not be good for, in your opinion, if that's how you feel, or would be good for, certain committee that they've applied for, because it can be disparaging to them
Right,
in
right.
public.
Absolutely.
It's just, I think that's it. As far as bringing other individuals, bringing chairpersons, he or she, into a meeting to discuss personnel for that specific board, I just don't see that as being appropriate. I just don't see that there's a reason to do that.
don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think one alternative would be if there, say there's multiple candidates or a candidate for the planning board, put in town administrator, run that by the chair of the planning board and at least get their read on it prior to the selectmen, to recommend or not recommend. That's all it has to be. It doesn't even have to be, just so that we have their input, doesn't mean we have to follow it.
That's
We've
fine.
done that before.
Right,
A couple
so to
times
me,
we've done it.
That's
Not
fine.
on the planning board. but we've
so
done it
I would
They work
suggest,
for me.
so I would suggest, I don't think I need to make this motion, but I would suggest that for committee appointments, if there's a standing committee, then you run it by the committee chair, if you could contact them and just say, do you recommend this person? I don't think it has to get complicated.
Yeah, I'm not saying we've always made the most popular decisions in town, but we try to.
Okay,
That works.
All right.
That works.
Okay.
Anything else?
The first budget.
All right. So moving on to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A personnel and take any resulting action once we get out of the executive session. There's a second. All second. Comment?
a question, are we in discussion on the executive session motion?
Yes.
So I guess I don't understand why I see our code enforcement officer sitting here, so I don't understand why it isn't the last one, consultation with code enforcement officer on pending enforcement matter. Oh, I see, that's the district court. So I guess I don't quite understand. What is this? Is there more information in terms of personnel matters?
The executive session material that I shared with your packet, the memo and the response.
Oh,
reference
see,
to all of that.
that was not clear.
I do apologize.
Okay.
I don't know how to make that any clearer. Without, you can write a little sheet note in there or something, I don't know.
No, the only, I think for me, the lack of clarity was simply because of the complexity of the issue. It wasn't clear to me that we were talking about that our conversation was restricted to these items as opposed to
The whole
legal
case.
stuff.
Okay.
Now I understand, it's just these items, so.
So we're not talking, I think I can ask this, we're not talking about the case per se, we're talking about this
Correct.
information.
And
Yes.
Okay, that was not clear.
my
Right, I'm sorry.
suggestion or my recommendation would be is in the future, if you have any possible questions of something like that about what this would pertain, either reach out to the chair or myself and we can give you a little
Thank
bit
you,
more
Chris.
detail
Thank you, Chris.
that's, that will clarify what the executive session would be about.
But this information was not in our packet, right?
It was not in the packet. I shared it all with you in your individual packets. It wasn't public information, but I shared it with you in individual packets.
All right. Are you okay? Hold on. We can
Yeah, no, I understand now, I was very confused, because I thought,
all clear?
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yes.
If in our opinions, we need any more clarification from attorney about whether we're being specific enough with our motion to go into executive session or not, I would appreciate it. We need to be more specific. If we're not being specific enough,
yeah, I feel like we are.
maybe we are, maybe we're not, but I would appreciate some sort of a opinion on it.
Maybe contact MMA and ask them about this. Yeah, if we need to have specifically what we're doing.
I spoke with them on that very question several weeks ago, and I read to her one of our items. Sure. She said specifically, just citing it and saying personnel. It would be good to follow up.
So,
And I would like it in writing and maybe a suggestive. Whatever. Carol?
so maybe we could send them this specific packet. and say, we went into an executive session to discuss this, what should the motion be?
Can I read something
Yes.
that actually came from MMA? Motion contents. A motion to go into executive session must indicate the precise nature of the business of the executive session and include a citation of one or more of the sources attached to it. Failure to state all authority justifying executive session does not constitute a violation. Inaccurate citation of authority does not.
So well, what my impression with that was these. So like the reason. Statutory citations. I thought that's what, when you try, that's what we've always done. So
We have not
basically,
had nearly as many as executive sessions as we had the last.
Yeah,
Well,
but
but
I didn't know we had to be more specific. Or, you know, so it would be good to know.
Well, I'm here at the motion that they have. I move to go into the executive session to discuss the appointment of the new town manager. So, I mean, I think that's pretty specific. It's not just personnel.
Right.
So I think that's the point. And they have a bunch of suggested motions on their website that you can use as a model. And so I think we need to be a little more heavy on that. But MMA has, yeah, they're up there. And so for this one, to me, it might be something like, I move that the board go to executive session pursuant to 1 MSRA 405-6 to discuss communications between, the code enforcement officer and the board of appeals, or communications between, town staff and town boards. I don't know how specific we need to get. Something like that, but I think we can find out from them today.
So we got a motion on the table. Are we amending the?
No.
Okay. So, all in favor?